It's a distinct pleasure to introduce Annie Lang. Annie Lang is, in my view, one of the premier scholars in our discipline. Has been for a number of years. It was a great honor to publish a lot of her work in media psychology. She really helped make media psychology when we first started out. I think some of our most cited work in the journal. Annie's been doing great work melding the psychophysiological measures to the understanding of psychological processes. And one of the things I really think has set Annie's work apart is we've always had the media effects tradition, and Annie's like, no, let's move beyond that. What we need to really understand are what are the underlying psychological processes. And her work has really exemplified and moved our discipline ahead years. And so, like I said, it's a great honor because Annie's a very good friend.
Thank you, Dave, for saying nice things about me. So, hi, John. Right there, right there.
I was sitting there, but I didn't know how you felt about that.
Well, you are a very intimidating figure, but I'm going to be all right with that.
I will scowl. I know you're not easily intimidated.
Okay, so, well, thank you very much for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here. I put this slide up for a really long time because so that you could just go through it and find out if you were on there or not. And so...
Esther made it and I didn't.
That's not me. That's not this Esther, it's a different Esther.
Esther Thielen, sorry.
Well, these are the people who didn't inspire my career. These are the people who inspired my post-career, which is what this talk is about. In fact, I not only don't approve of effects, I don't approve of processes anymore either, and I don't believe in brains anymore. So this is a talk about getting in touch with your inner animal, which is what I like to spend my time doing now. So I'm going to start with a little bit, because I gave a talk a while back, and I published this paper about how we are a disciplining crisis, and we need a new paradigm. And then people keep saying, well, that all sounds very well, but how do you do it? So this is my talk, How Do You Do It? Or this is my 5 attempts to do it. Okay, so here we go. So I'm going to start by saying that all my assumptions about communication have changed since the ones I learned from my wonderful mentors in graduate school, to the ones I learned from my wonderful colleagues, to the ones that I decided to invent for myself. So the general processes and effects paradigm, which most of you are probably being trained in, and which I spent a lot of time working in, like 30 years, assumes the following things: that societies and people sort of have equilibrium states, that as a result they tend to be fairly stable, that change is rare and difficult and probably bad, that the general linear model, which is, how we do ANOVAs and regressions and all that kind of stuff, and reductionism are the appropriate tools for doing science and therefore for studying media and communication. And that means we can ask questions like, can media change something? Do media have effects? How? That's the processes part, right? Do media have effects? So I made my reputation on LC4MP. I apparently go for really crazy acronyms. And that is a processes and effects theory. And now I'm living in the DHCCST world, which stands for Dynamic Human-Centered Communication Systems Theory, which is also a terrible name. And so this talk is about what happens if you think everything you did there was wrong, though still useful. Kind of like Newton's physics compared to Einstein's. And everything you think now is different. So I'm going to tell you what I used to think and what I think now, and then I'm going to take those assumptions and say, well, if you assume that, then how do you redo this study to find out the real answer? That's the way this talk will unfold. So in the old days, communication I defined as a dynamic interaction of a human and a medium and a message, because one of those M's is for mediated. The new Annie, A, thinks this is a mediated talk, and all communication is mediated, but we just have some types of mediation that are evolved, like this one, and some that are man-made. So communication evolved to get information from one entity's body to another, and I will say that if you read this theory, if you read the published theory, it says from one entity's brain to another entity's brain, and it attributes that definition to John Sherry. But I don't think the brain's very important anymore, so now I'm about getting information into your body. And if it happens to make it up to your brain, then great. But if your body acts on it, that's even better, because then you do it automatically. Okay, so obviously reductionism is supposed to be this great tool, and I now think nonlinear causality and dynamic systems theory are actually how we're going to end up explaining how people communicate. I used to think humans are limited capacity information processors. You could also think of this as the machine-inspired set of assumptions, and this is the, oh, we're really actually animals-inspired set of assumptions. So now I think humans are energy-saving, very important, evolved, also important, embodied, embedded, nested dynamic systems. I used to think that humans didn't change much and are often in equilibrium. Now I think change is constant, and stability is actually the rarity. I used to think perception and action are mediated by sensation. In other words, all that information comes in, your brain creates a thing and tells you what you're seeing. But now I think perception is mediated by action and that you actually see without your brain. I used to think the motivation systems could influence the cognitive system. I now think they do what they actually do, which is drive behavior, which creates perception, which leads to action and eventually sensation. But your sensations of thinking and doing and seeing are running at least 300 milliseconds behind your body, which is actually in charge. Okay, so that's the new me and the old me. And so what happens when you change your assumptions in that way, then your questions change, because you can't ask about effects and processes, because the answer is, are there effects? Yes, right? And the reason is because media are in the environment, and as the environment changes, the animal changes, and we are animals in a changing environment. So we're changing continuously, and communication evolved to help us adapt in short term to changes. So dynamic systems theory is a theory of change. And I'm sure you've heard a lot about dynamic systems theory here, given some of the people on your faculty. And so I'm only going to give you a one-slide précis, and you may forget it. The bullet points in bold are the ones I'm actually going to use, and the other ones are just to show I'm not stupid. Okay, so change is nonlinear. The sum of the parts does not equal the whole. That's really important, okay, because I don't actually think things happen in lines, that you are not persuaded, then you're a little persuaded, then you're a little more persuaded, then you're a little more, and then you're fully persuaded. No, I don't think that's true. The state space is all the things that can happen in a given situation to a given system or set of systems. That's your degrees of freedom. So whenever you go to study a type of communication, like this is a person talking to a group of people in a specific room, then that's our state space for this particular talk, and we could analyze it from that point of view. Changes from one qualitatively different self-organized outcome to another. So we're always doing one thing. We're not actually usually caught between two things. But that's an interesting place to be. And we usually change from doing the one thing to doing the other thing. So those are qualitatively different states. And I'm not going to talk about order parameters, though I think in general media are order parameters, because what they do is they slave some of your systems and reduce the degrees of freedom. So right now, I'm an order parameter for all of you in the room. Like if I move, it's like being in a tennis match. You all follow me on the ball. And now you're all looking this way, whereas before you were all looking that way, because the environment organized your behavior. And it slaved your perceptual systems, because I'm also an animal, so I'm dangerous. So you got to keep an eye on me. Control parameters are linear continuous variables that move the system from one space to another. So like if, for example, in human development, babies, when they're born, if you hold them upright, they step. And then they stop stepping, and then later on they start again, and people used to think, well, it went away. But it actually turns out that the order parameter is how much does the baby weigh. And if the baby's too heavier than its muscles, it don't step. Now, if you put it in water, there it goes, it starts stepping. So that's an example of a control parameter. And finally, this is my favorite one, which I always knew, and which we all knew in communication, but we could not commit to caring about it, which is that outcomes are extremely sensitive to initial conditions and context. And since each of us lives life and comes to every situation with different initial context, there is no reason to assume we will all do the same thing in the same place. Okay, so what's the communication state space? The communication state space includes at least one human. That's a set of evolved and nested dynamic systems involving perceptual and motivation experience, cognitive systems. We're embedded in a location. And there's a message being carried by one or more media of carriage. I'm the message right now, and the medium of carriage is air and light. And which information is presented in one or more encoding systems. I'm encoding this talk into verbal speech, written text, and later on, I promise, some really cool pictures and stuff. I have some videos, but I'm not going to play. They never work. Maybe, after, if you want to see paramecium eating other animals. So, communication is a dynamic overtime interaction among the embedded human's message medium of carriage and encoding system. So that's what we're doing right now, we're communicating. So, in this theory, it's really important to think about being embedded in a context because external environment organizes behavior. And this external environment will not allow some behaviors that we're perfectly capable of doing, but it also affords other behaviors that we might not do in other places. Because, yeah. So, where is a human embedded when they're using media? Now, this is a question that we're all really interested in, right? Because I know a lot of people here study presence, and some people might study transportation, and some people might study other things which are about being in a virtual world. So the possibilities are three. When you use media, you're in the real world, and you're just using media. Or you're in the mediated world, and you've actually lost sight of the real world, which would not be a very good adaptation. Or you're in both worlds. Okay, so you're partially in the media world, and you're partially in the... So what's the case? Well, we have to stop and redefine the real world. So I use direct perception theory or ecological perception theory or action perception theory. It goes by all those names, but it was originally thought up by J.J. Gibson, and if you're looking for some good reading, read his book. I have a picture of it later on if you want the title. It's for no other reason because he writes beautifully, but also just if you want to blow your mind about like what it means to see or to hear. So according to Gibson, there's the real world, and it's made up of four things. One is media, and media afford life. So air, you breathe it. Gravity holds you on the ground. Water, you drink it. These are media. Okay, light, we use it to see. So they afford life. Surfaces are all the flat things in the world. They could be the ground, they could be the walls, the ceiling, and different flat surfaces afford different things. They have different textures and things like that. Then there's objects which have surface, but objects are detachable. So you can remove them from the ground, from the thing they're a surface of, and you can do things with them. And finally, we have animals. Okay, the animals are really part of this talk, so don't forget the animals. So what's in the mediated world? Well, you could say pixels. Well, depending on the media, you could say lines. You could say two-dimensional shapes. But, well, how do we decide what's in the mediated world? So I borrowed information. Here's Gibson. That's his book, The Ecological Approach to Visual Perception. And he has some blow-your-mind chapters written in 1955 about what are pictures and what are moving pictures. That I don't know why I never met them until I was 57 years old. Andy Clark, who wrote Supersizing the Mind, if you've read that, who's all about embedded cognition, how we use the world to think and to save energy, because thinking is work. And Reeves and Nass, who have the media equation and talk about media as social actors. So, borrowed concepts from these people. People evolved in this world where everything in every place is real. Okay, so we evolved in a world that did not have unreal things in it. We invented them all. Reason S, there's no evolved switch for unreal. Your body can't go, oh, I'm in an unreal place now, I will act differently. It can't. It doesn't know what unreal is. Animals have a closed, this is Gibson's definition of an animal. It has a closed body envelope. It can change its external appearance. It can generate animate behavior, or at least what appears to be animate behavior. And as a result, they afford social interaction. So you interact with animals in a social way. Reeves and Nass calls this the media as social actors. I call it the media as animals. We interact with media as if they were animals. And animals are a special kind of thing in the world. So we respond to media in places as if they were real places. So we're going to say that the television world is the Gibsonian world, so it has surfaces and animals and objects and media. So here's, so then the interesting question becomes, once again, where are you when you're using media? Am I in this world or am I in that world? And Jumi, where are you? Raise your hand. This is Jumi Lee's master's thesis that she did with me at Indiana before she came to Michigan State, and for which she won a top paper award at ICA. Is it ICA? I think it's at ICA. So in this paper, we're going to take the notion that you have a startle response, right? So whenever something really loud happens or really fast and you go like that, that's a startle response. And startle responses actually give you an indication of how much your aversive or avoidance motivational system is active. So if you're in a place that's scary, like a horror movie, because I'm saying you're in the horror movie, right? Then your aversive system is active, and if somebody startles you, Hitchcock used to do this all the time, you jump like this big, even though you know it's coming. Whereas when you're in a positive place and you feel warm and comfy and a startle stimulus happens, it's actually inhibited, so that it can't totally interrupt whatever you're doing that's important. So, and in a neutral place, it's in between the two. So you're, when you're feeling good, you actually inhibit your startles. When you're feeling bad, you facilitate them, because you knew it was going to be bad and you better move fast now. So what that means is, and startles are automatic, they happen 75 milliseconds after the onset of the startle stimulus, and they're facilitated negative context, right? So that cat isn't scary when it says meow in the day, but when it says meow at night, you jump out of your skin. So in this study, participants navigated a virtual environment of 8 rooms, separated by hallways. Half of them were unpleasant, so the people would be in a scary place. Half were pleasant, so they would be in a happy place, okay? And half were dark, and half were light. So you went into a room where you could barely see it, or into a room that was bright and sunny with fairies and flowers. We did the same thing to the lab. The lab was, I should say Jeannie did, because she did all the work. She either had posters of fairies and flowers and happy things in the lab, and the light was on and it was bright, or she had skulls and terrible, horrible things and the light was off. And then, of course, we crossed it. So you could be in a light lab, and you could be in a pleasant lab with the lights on, and a dark virtual room with the light. So everything happened. So between subjects was the lab conditions, but within subjects were the virtual environment conditions. So we said, well, you should have a bigger startle in dark virtual environments if you're there, right? Regardless of what's happening in the room. So that's not a great number, 0.07, except I don't believe in GLM, so I don't care. But you might. But there are 8 significant interactions here, so to have that many interactions and still get a 0.07, I figure that's because that's good. So they did have bigger startles with a 93% probability in dark virtual environments compared to light virtual environments, all other things being equal. But here's an example of the kind of interaction that we got. So in this one, if the lab environment and the pleasantness of the lab and the virtual environment are the same, pleasant, pleasant, unpleasant, unpleasant, that's when you get the big startles. It's not anywhere else. So if I'm in a congruent, if my valence is congruent, then the light in the virtual environment is facilitating my startle. And what this tells me is not what's going on, but that they're in both worlds. Because both worlds, and we have tons of interactions between the two worlds, so exactly, I think future research in this area is going to have to try and get some way of figuring out how much people are feeling in the lab and how much they think they're in the first, so get measures of how much they were into the game and how much they were not into the game, and so on and so forth. Also, there's an interesting interaction that says something like we should have thought of, that the pleasantness of the lab doesn't matter very much when the lights are out, because you can't see anything. But I think the evidence is that the body's taking the evidence from both virtual worlds, and that's what's driving a 75 millisecond interaction. So you're in both worlds. So what happens when you, okay, so that's the first thing. What's in the mediated world? The same stuff that's in the real world. And are we in it? Does our body think it's in it? And I think there's evidence that your body thinks it's there. It's taking its cues from the virtual environment, including, environmental cues that should drive automatic behavior. Okay, so back when I used to think that humans were information processors and perception was mediated by sensation, then I thought, what information gets into the limited capacity channel for encoding? And is this, so I did work at looking at things that elicit orienting responses, things that elicit motivational activation, how much they're encoded. You could read it if you wanted to. But now we're using this thought. We don't think you need the brain to see. And so you shouldn't need the brain to decide what to see. Somehow the body must know what to see on its own. So what would the body think is important? Okay, and so again, from Gibson, we get this notion that your sensory receptors, so your eyes and your ears and your skin and your nose, all these things that take in information from the world, that they're what Gibson called evolved receptors for information in the world. So like he says that eyes are evolved receptors for ambient light. So there's all this information in ambient light that we don't actually see. We can't sense it, but it's what we're getting our information from. And they see the world without a brain. That's why all those other animals who have ganglia or no nervous systems, they can get around the world just fine, because they have evolved receptors that help them navigate the world. Creating mental representations is work. So here comes the energy saving part. It's a lot of work to think. Just having your brain in your head costs you 500 calories a day. And when you sit down to write a paper, it costs more. It's hard to think. It's hard work to think. So we should do as little of it as possible. That's basically the bottom line. So if you believe all this stuff, then the new question is not how much or not which things, but it's what types of information are our sensory receptors selecting out of the world for us to look at. I think this is a stupid slide. Yeah. So this question was kind of, are we going to go for surfaces? Are we going to go for objects? Are we going to go for animals? Are we going to go for media? And then the other question is, what aspects of the environment organize that behavior? So what is it about the environment that says to my body, take me, and other things that says, don't take me, don't take me. So these are the principles we already had from that other slide. Now we're going to add this one. Making mental representations is work, so we will do it as little as possible. Okay, we're not going to do it unless we have to. And so what do we have to make mental representations about? Things that aren't going to remain in the room, right? As long as you're here, I don't need to encode you, because you're right here, and I can look at you. But if you were to wander away, then I would need to keep you in mind, perhaps. So that's one thing, information that's unstable. And so from Andy Clark's book, we get the notion that we simply coordinate our sensory receptors with things that are stable in the world. Okay, so there's 6. And if you take that as a principle, then you should encode things that are unstable. You should encode things that go away, that matter, or that might go away. And you should encode animals, and that's from the previous thing, because animals afford social interaction, but they're also the most dangerous thing in the world, because they have animate behavior. So these are the things we think that you should encode. Now, the environmental parameters that determine whether you encode them, because you can't encode all of them. There's still that limited capacity thing going on up at the brain level. The body has no problem with it. So these are our 4 candidates for this really matters. How close is it to me? Because the closer you are, the more important you are, and that should determine how I deal with you. Doesn't mean I'm going to encode you, but it better affect what I do about you. Stability, is it going to stay or is it going to go? Motivational relevance, is it a threat or an opportunity? And finally, being animate, which is being an animal. Anything that can generate its own behavior requires special attention, right? That will never move, but you might. And they're both close to me, but I'm going to pay more attention to him. Okay, so we predicted a 4-way interaction naturally, just because they say you can't. But it's a world of 4-way interactions once you go into dynamic systems. So so here's the story. This is the story of how we came up with our hypotheses. Sitting around a campfire. Fire, motivationally relevant. Is it good or bad? Depends. It's good because it provides heat and light and warmth. It's bad because it might burn you. People, are they good or bad? It depends. It depends. So right now, everything's good. So what we say is the stable things about people, they're animals right in my immediate vicinity. So I'm going to stay coordinated with the stable things. And the stable things about people are, how tall are you? How fat are you? What color is your hair? Or do you have hair? But the fleeting things about you, are your facial expression, sudden movements, okay, things like that. And I should pay attention to those, because this guy, he looks pretty nice, but he could go bad at any moment. And I need to be aware of that, right? And same with the fire. It's pretty nice right now, but you know how they pop and then all that stuff is going on. And this guy, he's kind of an introvert, so he went off to watch the sunset, but he needs to remember where the fire is because otherwise he won't get back and he'll freeze to death, and that won't be good. So he needs to keep this fire in mind. So if you take that kind of a story and you think about it, then we argue that you will stay perceptually coordinated with imminent stable things about animals. So close animals, right, and all the stable things about them. So I don't need to encode the color of his shirt, I don't need to color anything about these animals close to me because I'm just going to keep an eye on you guys. I'm going to stay perceptually coordinated with the fire, with the imminent stable things about the fire. That's where it is, okay? So, and I'm going to create mental representations of fleeting things about imminent animals. That would be your facial expressions, movements, things like that. Because, you know, that first bad look you might not be the one where you try and kill me. So I need to remember that one to know when the next one comes, there was one before it. And fleeting aspects of imminent motivationally relevant things and peripheral motivationally relevant things. So things that I can't stay perceptually coordinated with. Okay, so what does that mean in the TV world? What is imminent? Imminence is things in the center of the screen. Okay, so that's a basic rule of thirds from things that those are the things that feel closer to you that are not viewed in your peripheral vision. Stability, we use Gibson's definition about stable and fleeting objects and aspects of things that are stable and fleeting. Motivational relevance, things that are threats or opportunities. Okay, so participants watch TV for 35 minutes. They watch a bunch of different stuff. It's kind of a channel surfing thing. After viewing, we have them do a change detection task. So everybody, I'm sure, knows what a speed recognition task is. But because every picture has all of these kinds of information in it, right? You can't just say, do you remember this person or something? So what we did was we went into frames and we changed something about it. A person's expression or the color of the gift or the color the room was painted. So, and in all our categories of types of information. And then people had to look at these and say, did something change in here? And they had to say yes or no. So I'm not going to tell you all the results of all the hypotheses. You can read the article. But this is my favorite, my best Popperian prediction, as in relatively inexplicable by and definitely not predicted by other communication theories, including LC4MP. So, you know, if you make a really risky prediction and it works, I figure that that's really cooler than saying something boring and having it work. Okay, so this was what we said. The worst change detection will be for imminent, motivationally relevant things that are stable. In other words, the stuff in the center of the screen that stays there a long time and is important. Which you would think is the stuff you'd remember best when you're watching TV, wouldn't you? So here's the four-way interaction. So motivationally relevant, central, and stable. Worst. And by a lot. By a lot. Second weirdest prediction. Overall, fleeting stuff should be remembered better than stable stuff. So the longer it's on screen, the worse it should be remembered. So that worked too. And the third one was that you should remember fleeting things about animals. Better than stable things about animals. Better than motivationally relevant stuff. Better than everything. Oh, and there it is. So I don't know how you get those predictions out of most of our theories of how we take information out of television messages. Okay, so I'm done with that study. Now I'm going to move on to the next one. So the next question is the problem of defining media and how we communicate. So what are media? And you know, since I was in graduate school, I remember all these all communication is unmediated. All communication is mediated. It's only medium if it's electronic. What does it even mean? I love the way we use these words all the time. So how do animals communicate? Well, they howl, they touch each other, they smell, they do waggle dances, they leave pheromone trails around. They communicate in all kinds of ways. They're really pretty good communicators, and they do without brains too, some of them with no brains at all. And so this is very Gibsonian, but the media of the world carry communication to animals, right? In other words, the world had media that afforded communication, and that's why we evolved to communicate. So air affords sound and hearing, Skin affords touch and feeling. Light affords vision and seeing. Water and air afford scent and smelling. And all these things carry information from the world to you, the animal that is you, and all the other animals in the world. And I call these in DHCCST because everything has to have its own name. Evolved media of carriage. Okay, so we evolved to get information using those. But then we invented all kinds of ways to communicate that don't use evolved media of carriage or use them secondarily. And I say that the interesting thing about man-made media of carriage is carry information, but that they carry information through time and space. Right? Because all the evolved ones work when we're in the room together. Right? I got to be able to see you or hear you or smell you, or we can't communicate. And it has to be happening in real time, or maybe slightly after real time for pheromone trails and stuff, but it doesn't have a long shelf life. But then we discovered how to use man-made media of carriage, which by and large require man-made encoding systems. We have to have some way to get them into it. So like here the wall is the medium of carriage, even though we didn't make the wall, but we could have, it could have been a wood wall. But we invented this representational encoding system and left it on the wall so that now we can go see it millions of years later, or maybe hundreds of thousands. And there's another medium of carriage. I can take this, if it's a tablet, and I can put it on that airplane and fly it somewhere. And now it's going all the way across the world. Or somehow we learned to do this kind of stuff, but I flunked physics. And that stuff just flies around like crazy. It's wonderful. So evolved encoding systems also exist to go with evolved media and carriage, right? And the encoding systems that evolved are howls, grunts, moans, screams, whimpers, gestures, body language, facial expressions, touch, pheromone trails, behavioral signals, things like that. Those are all evolved encoding systems. Man-made encoding systems have two big kinds. We put them all up there. Representations and symbols. And I'm not using those words the way other comp theories do because I'm using them in a completely Gibsonian way. Either it's something that can be directly perceived by your evolved receptors without going up to your brain, or it can't be. Okay, so the representations share perceptual information with the things they represent. And that would include, oh, I went the wrong way, sorry. That would include still images, moving images, any kind of sound recording, right? Symbols share no perceptual information with the thing they represent. So if you see the word smoke, it doesn't look like smoke. It looks like SMO. Shares no perceptual information with smoke. The only way you know what this means is because it makes a run up through the brain and then comes back down. And you know what it is. So that when you see smoke, the experienced reader reads that, and all the stuff you know about that word comes kind of active in your brain, and your neurons dynamically organize into the information that's associated with that word. That would be one thing I would say. And then you know what it means. So symbols run about 300 milliseconds behind representations in terms of how quickly the information gets into your body. So if we are no longer processors, but we're evolved, embodied, energy-saving, invested in dynamicness of systems. In other words, we're not very different from a chimp or a rat or even a fruit fly, and honestly, we're close to plants. So, and we now know that trees and plants are communicating in all kinds of ways. That research currently is fascinating. So this evolved communication stuff is in from single-celled animals down to plants and trees. So it's not that we haven't invented a lot of ways that we're conscious of to communicate, but what we don't realize is how much we're communicating that we're not conscious of. So, okay, people become animals who evolved in this world, adapted to perceive, navigate, survive, and procreate. If I had time, I would show you this great video of a painter who's painting something, and you would look at it and go, what is he painting? And then I would pause it, and I would tell you all to turn upside down and look at it. And you would go, oh, it's a face. Because we actually perceive in gravity. And people can't recognize things that are somewhat abstract upside down, but when you turn the people upside down, they go, oh, that's that. We really do perceive in the world. So, and we mostly do it without brains. So. a lot of what we do is being taken care of by our bodies. So if you stop assuming that motivational activation is just about tuning our ability to control our own selves, and is actually the thing that's driving our behavior, and that it's only the 300-second lagging behind brain that can come in and try and alter that behavior, then you start thinking about things in a little bit different way. And one of the things you start worrying about is what I call biologically imperative actions. So if something bad happens in this room, I have to, my motivational system is going to go bang, and it's going to start moving me backwards. Even if I don't want to go backwards. And then my brain will say, oh, that was nothing, it's okay. Go back forwards again, it was not a bad thing. And you know, one of the great things we can do is try and control those things, which, and we do that with language, because language is a great way to reduce biological imperatives, and we do it with thinking, but we still have the animal that's responding first. I'm not going to show you those because I don't have time. Sorry. Afterwards, if you can see them. So, a biological imperative is an animal's automatic motivational activation in response to motivationally relevant material in the environment. And the important things about that are that you can't stop it and that it's really fast. We also have larger biological imperatives to what are called primary reinforcers. Right? So you learn lots of things that you don't like. And all the things you don't like elicit aversive activation. But a lot of those are learned, right? Like, I don't like fish. So every time I see fish, I don't like that. But I didn't evolve to not like fish. In fact, fish as food are a primary reinforcer. So the primary reinforcers are food, opposite sex mates, and, oh, there's some others. But those are the big ones, food and sex. And the predators. And the bad ones are predators and yeah, threats. And then these are non-primary, presence and praise. So here's the hypotheses for this study. Biological imperatives should be bigger with representative encoding systems because I directly perceive them, so the body responds before the brain can inhibit. They should be smaller if I give you the word of the same thing, right? Because the word has to go up and get the brain, so I'm already inhibiting it by the time the thing gets it. It already knows it's reading a word, right? So I should have a smaller biologically imperative response, but I should still have one. Because the only way communication is adaptive is if it can also control my motivational systems, right? If I yell fire and that doesn't hit your motivational system, you just think, I wonder if that's true. It won't get you out of the burning building, right? It's because I yell fire and your aversive motivational system goes, let's leave, that you actually start moving. Yeah. So that's what part. So these are the things that are going to lead to what we're going to do. So in this study, we had 60 pairs of symbols and words. So picture of an apple, word apple, right? Picture of a dog, word dog. And we had just asked people to do two things. We said, okay, look at these pictures as fast as you can. They come in random order. Just tell me if it's picture or word. That's all. You don't need to know what it is to do that task. You can inhibit everything about as much as you can inhibit to just go picture, word, picture, word, picture, word. Doesn't matter what they are. We call that form categorization. The other thing we asked you to do was categorize valence. Tell me if it's good or bad. Now, according to me, that is the job of the motivational systems. They evolved to tell you good, bad, good, bad, and to keep you going towards good and away from bad. So to get the good, bad information, you cannot inhibit your motivational system. You can inhibit it some, but you have to let it go to give you that information. Now, this is not conscious. It's just the way you're going to self-organize to do the task as well as possible. So the hypotheses here are that when you form categorize, you don't need the motivational information. You can inhibit it harder, right? To valence categories, you need it to get information, and you're going to get bigger biological. I said all this stuff, so let's just go straight to it. Pictures will be categorized as pictures more slowly than words will be categorized as words, because you have to first respond to the picture and then you can categorize it. Whereas the form is not getting a biologically imperative response within the time of your simple reaction time or your choice reaction time, because you get 300 seconds to go word before you know what it is. Whereas when it's a picture, you're going away from it before you can say picture. Okay? So they should be slower, and they are. Fair amount slower. 27% of the variance. I only have some of these variance things up because I bitch about communication only explaining 3% of the variance. Sometimes I go, hey, look, that's big, just for fun. And when form compared to valence, because you have to respond, you're going to be slower when you do the picture task, right? When you do the valence task, because I got to let the motivational information in. So let's just get there and see it. And so I'm going to be a lot slower to categorize valence than form. And while that doesn't look like a huge difference, that 300 milliseconds isn't bad, it's a big difference. Everybody really slower to categorize valence than they are to categorize form. Okay. And we also did the study where we had the pictures and the words move towards you because it's really scary when animals come close to you. And we said that would be more arousing when they come towards you, and they are. Here's the pictures coming towards you, and here's the words coming towards you. So we're that picture, not so good. Okay. All right. So there's 3 assumptions we changed, 3 different ways we got of looking at how we process media, and at least 3 or 4 things that we wouldn't have predicted using LC4MP. That every time I publish one of these papers, they say, you have to tell us what LC4MP would have predicted and that you were wrong. And I say, okay, I was wrong. So persuasion is really interesting to a lot of people. Right, Dave? So I brought persuasion examples, and tobacco is really interesting to a lot of people, right, Ashley? So I brought some tobacco. So let's talk about persuasion. What is persuasion from a dynamic systems point of view? So back in the old days, in the 50s, like when my dad was a young professor, they defined attitudes as behavioral preparedness to respond towards or away from an object. So it was in the body. It was a behavioral preparedness. That's what I think it is today. We talk a lot about implicit and explicit attitudes, and this whole study is, I'm not going to read all those words, is about an argument that I'm making. I put them in case people say, can I have your slides? And I send them my slides. And they don't have to remember what I said because I talk too fast and I have too many slides. LC4MP says you cannot remember this talk. Don't even try. So I'm going to make an argument in the study that your implicit attitude is when I say, how do you feel about this? And I put an attitude object in front of you, whether it's a word or a picture, it's your automatic motivational response to that picture. Okay? Because you can't not have one. I put up a cat, I say, good or bad? Your appetitive system goes, oh, kitty. And then it motivates behavior. And implicit attitudes are all measured by speeded button pushing tasks, and button pushing is behavior. So the bigger the motivational activation is, the faster you'll push the button. That means the stronger your implicit attitude is, the faster you will say good or bad, and the direction you say good or bad is whether you like it or you don't like it. So if it gets aversive motivational activation, you're going to be really fast on the I don't like it. And if it gets big appetitive activation, you're going to be really fast on the I like it. This study is all about what happens when it's a little good and a little bad, or a lot bad and a little good, or what about when they're mixed up, okay? The other part of the persuasion story is explicit attitudes, which are thoughtful, right? And what we're going to argue from a dynamic systems point of view is that your implicit attitude is your initial condition for making an explicit attitude decision. Okay, so and remember, initial conditions are really important about determining what behavior is going to organize out of this thing. So here comes the thing. You have an implicit motivational response to it. That's your initial condition. Now here comes my argument about what you should do, right? And that's all these reasons. And I could be producing them too in my own brain about what I should do. And then someone says, okay, now what's your attitude? And I've gone through this whole thing and I go, well, I guess it's here, right? And depending on where I started from and the kinds of information you gave me in between, I'm going to come to a decision, okay? So, yeah, and here's the fast button pushing for high activation. So here's the thing, if I'm right, then implicit attitudes ought to act the same way motivational systems act in the real world, right? So this is the defense cascade model. It's a predator-prey model. So here we are in a pre-encounter. That means the bad guy hasn't shown up yet. state, and so we're pretty, we're fine. We're in a basically neutral or slightly appetitive state. And so there's our sweat, and there's our startle. If you got me now, I'd be neutral. And then here I am. I'm the prey, and I'm a bunny, and now here comes the predator. He's way off in the distance, though, so I'm still pretty calm. So now I'm going to go into a state of attention. So I actually get increased appetitive activation to take in information about the prey, which you see in the inhibited startle. The heart rate decreases, which is a sign of increased attention. But at the same time, I might need to run away, so you're seeing activation in the arousal system, okay? And that would give you an attentive bunny, who's no longer nibbling his food, but like paying attention to that nasty prey. And then the prey comes closer, and the bunny runs away. Because at post-encounter stage, that bunny gets close enough, and bam, you go. So he's frozen, then he goes. So that's what should happen in the defense cascade. If that's what should happen. And the second part of this is, it should happen more if I show you primary reinforcers than if I show you secondary reinforcers. So to test this hypothesis, that's the secondary one. To test this hypothesis, we did, I already said all that. 75 images with different ratios of pleasant to unpleasant information in the picture. So there were 15 slides in each of 5 categories. They were completely 100% negative. We normed them and rated them in advance to get slides that came out this way. They were 25% negative and 75% positive. They were equally negative and positive. So that's the freeze state in the defense cascade. They were 75% positive and only 25% negative, or they were completely positive. And half in each category were food, which is a primary reinforcer, as the positive reinforcer, and the other half was never a primary reinforcer. And then we just said, tell me as quickly as possible, I like, I don't like, which is an indicator of which system is more active, right? So when both systems come up, the one that's more active gives you the choice. And so at 50-50, that should take the longest, right? Because until one system finally gets over it, which may require thinking about that picture. Like one of my favorite 50-50 pictures is a wedding, and they're all dressed beautifully, and they're down there, and the words are being said, and you're looking up the aisle, and the backs of everybody, and closest to the camera, heading down the aisle, is a big boa constrictor. It's like, what do we do with this? So, okay, so quickly categorize, that's all they have to do. And so the speed of categorization gives you activation levels, and the choice gives you which way they went. And choice follows the more active system, yeah. Okay, so here it is. This is the defense cascade. All positive, really fast to say approach. Mostly positive, slower to say I like, right? Because I'm still okay, you're way far away. But 50-50, really slow, might go either way. Negative greater than positive, I should say I don't like it now, but I'll be a little faster than at the end. And then all negative, really fast, and everybody says I don't like it. Okay, so this is the choice data. So this is 100% people say yes, this is 0% of people say I like, this is 0% of people say I like. And sure enough, at all negative, there's always a few jokers in there, but here we're moving up, negative greater than positive, positive equal negative, and it's a little under 50%, and that's evidence of the negativity bias that humans have. And then we go above, and then again, everybody doesn't like good stuff. Everybody. Some people are. And here's the reaction time data, and there you go up to freeze and back down. And again, the steep slope is the negativity bias. Adding in the negative is way more strong than putting the positive back in. Okay, so if implicit attitudes are automatic motivational activation, then we should also see that this is different for food than not food. So they should be faster to give their answer for food and not than they are for food, which they are by a fair amount. And so those decisions about food are made really quickly. Now the question is, which way are they going to go? I like or I don't like. And I offer you two things. One is evolution, which I believe in, which is that, hey, food was scarce when we evolved. A little tainted food, so what? Starvation is worse than a little skilled. So if it's food, I'm going to give it a try. Learned adaptation, which everybody loves learning, right? Well, it's America. Food is cheap. I'm not going to eat anything that's even a tiny bit tempted, so that's all going to be bad. Of course, I'm happy. Evolution wins. They say I like more, and they do it faster for food than they do for food. And then they do for non-food. Okay, now we're really going to get into persuasion.
Before you move on from that, was the distribution of the reaction times same that inverted?
It's fairly normal, the reaction time distribution. And yeah, almost everything differs significantly from each other except those two. Even though those two look farther apart, they're not different. Okay, so now we're going to get all the way to messages, PSAs, indeed. So what do you do with this? How do you make a message any different than the way you would make a message? How would I make a message any different? So I think of communication this way, that it has exactly, so I'm trying to get you to stop smoking. This is for Ashley. We'll talk about stopping smoking, which smoking is an interesting problem because in addition to being a learned behavior and an appetitive behavior, it's also an addictive behavior. So your body wants to do it doubly. So to me, the persuasion problem becomes for most things not convincing your brain you shouldn't do it, that's easy, but helping your body not want to do it because your body's driving behavior and we can all inhibit so much. And then we get tired and then we do the automatic thing and then bam, we're doing the wrong thing again, right? So how do you talk to the body is like how I think of this study. So each time the opportunity arises to make a choice, they either comply or they don't. So if I say don't smoke, then 75 times a day, if you're a smoker, and then something makes you think I should smoke. And then each time you have to make that decision. So whatever made you think it, the environmental thing that brought up the idea, it elicited your initial condition. And let's say you just had a cigarette, it might be smaller than if you haven't had one for 2 hours. Your initial thing, and then you go through all the reasons why, and then you make a decision. So the whole goal of us as persuaders now is to destabilize the stable behavior and stabilize the unstable behavior. So we have to create perturbations to the system that destabilize that behavior. And then we have to keep doing them until we knock you out of that into another pattern, and then we have to do things to stabilize the new pattern. So that's how I define, and so you might be starting with a very deep attractor, and the other attractor is really weak. Now, it's interesting, something like smoking is really interesting because you spend a lot of time in the non-smoking state, depending on how much you smoke. So the person who only smokes in the bar on Saturday nights is actually a pretty stable non-smoker. And they just have this one environmental place where they organize into smoking behavior. And so that's a different problem than from the chain smoker who spends about 30 seconds an hour not smoking. And they have this really deep attractor that they're stuck down in, and bringing them out of that is going to be a lot harder. So each choice is influenced by things about the context, so whether the person is alone or not, whether you're in a place that allows smoking or not. And a lot of the reasons smoking's been so successful as a behavior change in this country is by changing environmental laws. Not letting people smoke around you, not letting you smoke, and thereby increasing the amount of time, no matter how much you smoke, that you spend not smoking, which just immediately starts to stabilize that behavior. So things about the environment, things about the person, your initial attitudes, and how much you want to quit, how much you don't want to quit, as well as how you actually feel about smoking, how addicted you are, blah, blah, blah. And your goals, all that stuff is all part of it. And then there's whether your messages are talking to your animal, I'm going to say, or talking to your brain. So, all this is happening over time, blah, blah. Let's skip this one. Here's one with pictures. So, here I am walking around through the world, and oh, look, those people, they're smoking. Ooh, I want to smoke. That seems like a really good idea. That would be fun. So, I'm having an appetitive activation, right? And now, thoughtful decision-making begins. Oh, wow, I can smoke here. The people are. This is cool. I could do this. Oh, but now, this is what I call brain-activated aversive activation. I really shouldn't smoke. It's bad for me, like that. So I don't know. I don't think I should do this. Oh, environmental stimulus. Smoking can cause a slow and painful death. Oh, that's bad. I don't really want a slow and painful death. So now I've got some aversive activation going, and I'm just going to keep doing this, and eventually one system's going higher than the other, and I'm either going to say, hey, can I have a cigarette? And I'm going to sit down some other, and be like, okay. So successful persuasion campaigns need to act on people at multiple levels, including changing context, goals, reasons, and level of directions. And so we need to talk to brains to change goals and reasons. We need to talk to bodies to change implicit. And so how do we do that? So in this study, we made two big hypotheses. One is that, or maybe there's three because I don't know how to write them out. One is that you need to use representational encoding systems to talk to the body. Things that are directly perceived will talk to the body better than things that come through the brain. And that you need to use words, symbolic systems, to talk to the brain so that it can inhibit motivational activation and act in its own way. And finally, frequency is a hugely important, and especially consistent frequencies, aspect of body learning, right? When you get the same message over and over again. There's always food on this hill. Therefore, when I'm hungry, I will always go to that hill first. There's hardly ever food on this hill, so I'll only go there sometimes, right? I mean, this is a kind of learning that the environment teaches you. So frequency should matter. So in this study, we did an encoding system by dose by topics study with 14 PSAs on 4 topics. High dose condition is 5 messages, so don't do drugs, don't drive unsafely. Low dose condition is 2 messages, don't pollute, and don't have unsafe sex. And so we had people rate their emotional experience after watching each thing. We had them do a single target IAT test, and we had them give their explicit attitudes for all these activities after they saw our 14 commercials. And we predicted that representations would lead to more arousal than symbolic messages, and they did, and that's the biological imperative. And these messages for the first 10 seconds have only representations, only words. After that, they do go mixed, some of them. So that is in here, exactly how to, yeah. Anyway, just to tell you. But the first 15 seconds, 10 to 15 seconds, they're all one. We also predicted that they would be more negative and less positive, because they're all negative. Well, they're not all negative messages, they are, and they were. So the whole emotional experience thing was stronger when you used representations for the first 10 seconds than if you used words. And then we said that representations would influence implicit attitudes. I told you this, and symbols would, and we were wrong. Wrong! Because what we found is that they both had equal effects on implicit attitudes. But oddly enough, the representational PSAs change the explicit attitudes more than the symbolic messages do. And we said dose will increase both implicit and explicit attitudes, and it does, but the effect is way larger on implicit attitudes than it is on explicit attitudes, which surprised the heck out of me. Even though I said it would happen, that you'd be dose would talk to the animal, I was really surprised. It also increases both positivity, negativity, and arousal. So dose is really big. Dose is really big, and we never look at it in studies. Like I've been looking for anybody who did PSA studies with dose. I think we're first. I think we're first. And it has a big effect. I don't have it with me, but the effect sizes in that study, the smallest one is 17% and the biggest one is 82%. So I like them. Okay, yeah, finally, I'm almost done. Deep attractors in Grand Theft Auto. I've already talked a lot about attractors, but those are deep attractors. They're way down here. This is actually a repeller, so nothing can actually go there. It's a theoretical kind of mathematical thing that if you get there, you're gone instantly, but that kind of means you never get there in the real world. So it's a repeller. And then there's a not very stable, and there's a stable attractor. So what is virtual? What is a game? So I think a game is simply a virtual environment, which I've now convinced you, I hope, that you're actually in that virtual environment. So it's like going to another country. And when you go to another country, you don't know how to behave. And when you go into a game, you don't know how to behave if you've never been there before. So what do? You do the things you do in real life, right? Or you act the way you already know how to act. Now, Grand Theft Auto is a really interesting game if you haven't played it, because you can do all kinds of things you do in real life, like go bowling, go on a date with Michelle in this version, buy clothes, and go to the diner. right? So you can do all kinds of normal things. You can also do things, and to get to all of them, you have to drive, and we all know how to drive. And then you can also do things you don't normally do in real life, like shoot people and beat them up on the street, and hey, get a tank and blow up the city, or have a straight-on submachine fight with somebody. It's really crazy, but you can do. So what will people do when they find themselves in Grand Theft Auto? And this study is based on studies done by Thielen and Smith with behavioral development, so it's working on multiple time scales. So what we did is we put people into the game who vary from extremely inexperienced with games and with Grand Theft Auto to extremely experienced with games and Grand Theft Auto. And then we also had them play for 30 minutes with no instructions. Just play this game for 30 minutes. The whole thing was videotaped, and then we went back and coded what they did. But what we told them, we gave them no instructions, but the time scale of 30 minutes is the learning time scale. So the skill is our developmental time scale. We should see different types of attractors developing as you become more skilled at the game. And the learning thing is the beginning of developing a Grand Theft Auto attractor when you already have the will. Okay, so and this is just an example, like you might, as a child, learn to talk one way at home, and then you go home and say what you said at home to some stranger, and your mother says, and then you learn, oh, I don't say that word. That I don't, right? Okay, so unskilled players, we said, will not know the affordances of the game. Now remember, direct perception is operating in video games. They are just like the world, right? Everything in them is pretty much directly perceivable. And in direct perception, you don't actually see things, you see what you can do with them. And so we'll see the affordances we've learned to see. If we see a car, we'll think, I could drive it. We probably won't think, I could run over somebody with it. Right? So, so unskilled players will not know the affordances of the game, but they will know the affordances in the represented environment that exist in the real world. So they should have deep attractors for how to do a lot of things you can do in the game, like driving. And skilled players will also have real-world deep attractors, but they may have developed game deep attractors, which respond to the reward and punishment existence in the game, right? What's a threat and what's an opportunity in the game is not the same as what's a threat and what's an opportunity in the real world.
Just real quick, any idea about the level of familiarity of unskilled players with the game?
Not at all. Coming up. Okay, so we looked at two kinds of behavior that have strong real-world attractors, but have different affordances in GTA. So the not real-world attractor is perfectly great. It's better way to play GTA, maybe. Okay, so, and that was driving, obviously. And the other is not dying, which is a very strong, don't want to die, real-world attractor. But in GTA, it's actually better to die than it is to get arrested. So we'll start with destabilizing driver. The real-world attractor is to drive safely, and I'm going to argue that your real-world attractor has three primary rules. One is don't hit people, and the second rule is don't hit cars, and the third rule is don't hit objects. Okay, because those are the choices you'd make if you had to hit one thing, right? And on average, but I don't believe in averages because you do one or you do the other. But that's what they do. So this is the number of pedestrians that people hit on average, regardless of skill, and this is the cars and that's the objects. Okay, but we don't care about that because the real question is, are you stably not hitting people and objects and things, or are you unstably hitting objects and people and things? And if GTA stabilizes your real-world attractors by not punishing you for doing it or by making the game more fun, if you do it, then you should start hitting lots of people and places and things. And but the other thing is it depends on all sorts of things about you, right? How active is your aversive system? How active is your repetitive system? How much are you an aggressive person? All kinds of things about you and your initial conditions going into this game depend, and everybody isn't going to do the same. Some people may simply become great real-world drivers. They never hit anything. They just drive to take Michelle on a date, and then they drive to go buy some clothes, and then they drive perfectly. And some people may hit everything inside, and there may be people who split back and forth. Neither one is stable. They go in both ways. So, I already said that. So this is what happens. Now, This is not your usual kind of picture. Every one of these lines is a person. Here's the skill thing. See these subject numbers down here? This person is 1, 1, 1, 12. That means your subject number is 12. If you get hold of my data set, you can find that person. 1 means I am not familiar with video games. The second one means I am not familiar, I have never played GTA, or I don't know GTA. And the third one means I'm not familiar with GTA. So in the ones, these are all the ones, we get up to, I'm not skilled with video games. I actually am pretty skilled with GTA, and I'm pretty familiar with GTA. So we have different kinds of familiarity writing these things, and in general, but I got bored making the lines. They kind of get darker as they get more advanced, but you can read the numbers. But here's the low-skilled people, and they ought to drive like the real world. And you'll see that they don't hit a lot of pedestrians, they hit more cars, and they hit even more objects. But even here, we see maybe there are some people who don't mind hitting people so much, and some people who do, and we get more variability here and more variability here. Now we're looking for variability because you destabilize an attractor by creating variability, and then you restabilize it when the variability gets away. So at medium skill, we see increasing range of people. Now they're going up almost to 0.4, and how many, this is per second, how many people hit per second. And this is, and there's more variability at cars and even more variability at objects. And here we're getting even more variability. So clearly some people are destabilizing. There's kind of a sign that they go two ways with people. I'm either going to become a people hitter or I'm not, right? But the other things are less like this. So what about initial conditions? We know they are influenced. So the biggest initial condition we had with this data set is sex. Okay, because it's a really different life if you grow up in a male body versus a female body. So that's what we're going to do. So do they destabilize in different ways? So here's the low-skilled people. Here's the men. Maybe two groups there, who knows? But, you know, low-skilled, they look a lot like the way you look. Here's the women. Now they're separating out in objects in a way that the men maybe are, maybe aren't, who knows? But as we keep going, you're going to see that women definitely go two ways. But they don't destabilize nearly as far on hitting people as the men do. The men eventually give you these two people groups, it's kind of there, but they don't seem to break into those two groups, good drivers, bad drivers, right? They're doing something different. I can't explain to you what it is, but the initial conditions have led us to different things. Okay, that's our developmental time scale variables, but what happens with driving over the course of a 30-minute session? So if you're going to end up with a GTA, I like to hit things attractor, then by the end of 30 minutes, you should be hitting more things than you were at the beginning of 30 minutes. And if you're going to stay with your real-world attractor, at the end of 30 minutes, you should be hitting fewer things than you were hitting at the beginning. So let's see if that happens. Yeah. Too many words. Okay, so it's lighter is hitting fewer and darker is hitting more people in the second half, and blue is for boys and pink is for girls. So if we just look at the boys, they start out 50-50 at low skill. Then they start hitting more people in the second half, even more people in the second half, even more people in the second half. So they are moving towards I like to hit stuff. And this is all stuff added together. People, objects, things. No discrimination. Girls, we see something different. They end up 50-50 at high skill. But they start out, I'm hitting fewer. And then they climb up to more, and then they come to 50-50. So initial conditions matter, and it looks like both kinds of attractors are developing. Some people go one, and I don't know who goes which way, of course, that's the next question, and I'm not going to answer it. Dying is a great one. It's a good idea not to die. In GTA, though, your choice is to die because they're chasing you and they're shooting at you and everything's happening, or to get arrested. If you get arrested, though, you lose all your money, and you lose all your weapons, and you come back to the game outside the hospital or something. So it's kind of boring. You keep ending up back in the same place without any money and without any weapons. If you die, you keep your weapons, and you keep your money, and you show up randomly somewhere in the game, so it's more interesting. So it's actually pretty good to die. So we're going to look at this by all three kinds. So here's the picture. GTA skill is the graphs. This is GTA familiarity across the bottom. Okay, we don't have game skill in this one. And what you see is this is the percent who choose dying over being arrested. So this person is always arrested, We have 3 people here who are always arrested. We have 2 people here who are always arrested. And nobody here at highest level who's always arrested, but a lot of people who are arrested a lot, right? But the percentage who die, the mode at every single level is to die. So that comes on pretty quickly. And it looks like there are definitely some non-diers. You're just not going to get me to die, no matter how good it is in the game. Okay, so, and finally, I didn't say I was going to give you weapons, but everybody likes weapons. We don't really, most of us have a behavioral attractor about weapons because we don't use them, especially those of us in academia. We have a cognitive attractor, don't shoot people. But we haven't practiced it, most of us. If you have a gun, maybe you shoot targets, but a lot of people who have guns actually shoot things, so I don't know. But so we said most people will use more weapons in the second half than in the first half because that's our learning time scale. And we said more skilled players will use more weapons because you have to figure out how to find them and get them and use them. So that's learning the affordances of the game. And we said men and women will be different. The line goes down only if you use fewer weapons in the second half of the game than in the first half of the game. And this is skill. So these are the ones players, the 2, and this is GTA skill. And clearly everybody's using more weapons here than they are, but there are a few people who are going, and blue is 4. And the girls look completely different. There's a lot of people, there's a lot of fewer weapons in the second half. Hey, I tried it, it wasn't so great. There's a lot of people who didn't use weapons at all. Those are the zeros. And we've only got 2 who actually use more weapons in the second half than the first half. And I've already bombarded you with things, so I won't say anything else. Yeah.
I think we have till 4:30, so.
They're saying, what just happened? Was hit by a truck.
Well, but there's a cute kitten, so we're all just.
There's a
enjoying
cute kitten. Kittens drive the internet. Yeah. Super repetitive.
Well, couldn't you predict that with the LC? No.
Like the kitten.
Yeah. Are there any questions?
Well, okay, I'll try.
Are you nuts, Annie?
No, I'm curious, the closest thing that I've seen to this, well, aside from reading James Gibson when I was in high school, or college,
It's a great high school.
Daniel Dennett.
Yeah.
Daniel Dennett, philosopher, okay? Dennett says, he says a lot of things, and I'm not exactly sure, I don't know if you've read him.
I don't think I have.
But
I will
he,
now. I do
he
everything
does
she
not
does.
believe that consciousness is located in the brain. And it seems to me that you might partially agree with that.
Oh, I do.
Okay.
The sensation of consciousness is located in the brain. And that's the way most of us define consciousness. But,
So he
Anyway,
has
go
this-
on with your
All right, so but you ought to read him, I think.
I think
because
so, too.
I
always
he's-
do what you say.
He's very,
Yeah,
I've
Google
never
it
been.
right now. Yes.
No, but so he wrote, I mean, he's a man of many talents, and so he wrote a novel in which a person had to go and, deactivate a nuclear bomb. And so in order to do this, they decided to send his body, but not his brain. So they took his brain out and put it in, wrapped it up in paper and stuff like that, so it'd still be good, right?
Pointing out that. You should keep this for me while I go do something so stupid.
Absolutely.
No one can do it.
And so the thing was, he experienced his consciousness with his body. So his consciousness went where his body did, and it was not in his brain. And then there was some, I forget what happened after that, but it just seems to me that there is a certain, that could be a philosophical foundation, maybe, or,
Yeah.
I mean, he's a very well-known atheist philosopher guy.
Yeah, well, and I think that is, of course, the crux of it, and the real place that I'm finding my answer to that question is actually in the animal cognition and animal communication behavior literature, which is really fascinating. And one of the things, of course, that's really big in that literature is, the notion of self-awareness, which is what I mean when I say sensation mediated, but that I know I'm seeing John, as opposed to when my direct receptors see him and I'm going this way and I stop and say, did I see someone I know? That's the direct receptor saying, I think there's someone you know over there. You should turn and look and see, right? I mean, it's like, so, and one of the interesting tests they have, which is pretty fascinating, is that they put a dot on the animal's forehead and they give the animal a mirror. And then they wait to see what happens. And it has to be a mirror big enough for them to see the whole body. It doesn't work, like they thought for a long time. And either the animal starts doing things, bringing its wing up or its hand or trying to rub it against the wall, implying that it knows that's me. There's a dot on my head. Or they don't. And that's kind of, it's like the litmus test right now, that sort of self-awareness. And, but you would be surprised at the animals that fail it, based on how they do other cognitive tests and how smart they appear to be, and the animals that pass it. Suggesting, and I'm going to suggest that a lot of behavior, very smart behavior, including tool making and the learning of calls and passing down social calls and social tools that are specific to one group of animals, are happening in animals that fail that test. So there's a lot of communication, social communication, and learned communication that is passed on to the young, happening in animals that are not passing that test. And is it right to say they are not conscious? See, again, I don't know, are they thinking to do that? Maybe not. But there's something between self-aware thinking animals and, and no consciousness at all, I think. And I think that we, as people coming out of cognitive training especially, and out of, Descartesian traditions of, the rational mind and the irrational animal sort of thing, that we really privilege thoughtful explanations for what we do, because we believe that we are thoughtful, but really we're getting 99% of our information that comes up to our frontal lobes is coming up from the animal, from all our sensory receptors, from our own body interoception, from things in the environment we're not really aware of, but they're there and they're setting our initial conditions and stuff. And we are limited capacity. Awareness, our sensation is very limited, and then we make decisions and we think about them in words. So we think we're rational, but we're probably not nearly as rational as we think. We know we aren't, because we keep saying, why do people do this crazy stuff? And we talk about it in journalism and in other things as bias, but we are incredibly biased as animals. We're biased away from bad and towards good. And good is always good, because we did evolve in a world where food was scarce. So overeating was not bad, and putting on a lot of fat so that you could get through the next bad thing was not bad. And now we want you to do things that take work, because they aren't bad for an evolved animal. They're just bad for an animal living in America. You know what I'm saying? So, and whenever you have to inhibit, you're working, and that means you will fail. Not every time, right? But if you can get your body to switch, then you will succeed. If that makes sense. So, so the answer to what is consciousness, that's a really, it's a tricky word. But do I think that we do a lot of thinking that we are unaware of? And do I think that is really thinking, not just reacting? Yes.
So actually, an organism that had very few neurons would be more true to itself, so to speak, right?
It's entirely.
It doesn't have all this.
And it's not
equipment up
just.
here.
It's not even neurons. It's pretty much frontal lobes. I would say, and which you start to get in mammals, all kinds of mammals, right? Like, and I mean, this is a joke, but so I'm not even gonna make it, but yeah, that's why you can condition a rat, and you can condition, I mean, because the environment changes. And that's what brains evolved to do. When the environment makes us a radical right turn, and what was good is bad, we can learn. Ants and stuff, not so much. They're much more like, animals that have only one way and can't, so a lot of thinking and communication were about fast adaptation to massive change, I think. And so they make sense, but then once you change, you could change back, but it's not that easy.
Other questions? I think we have time for one or two more.
So kind of running with some of these ideas with respect to persuasion, you point out how persuasion that targets motivation is likely to fail because it requires constant work. So does that mean that...
Wait, I said persuasion of just
Persuasion-
the mind?
Yeah, so in other words, if you're motivated to keep doing this behavior that you wish you would do, you're having to constantly work, and so eventually you'll fail, like you were saying. Do you think persuasion might be more effective if it tries to teach skills that reduce the amount of work necessary to...
Well, I think that the teaching of skills and the giving reasons, I think they all matter, and I think our studies showed they do matter. They're actually moving implicit attitudes also. But I think the greater you can drive down, like if you're on a diet and every time you see chocolate cake, your repetitive activation goes up to here, it's going to be hard. And especially things that are primary reinforcers or that are addictive or that give you physical sensations, those are the hardest things to fight because they really do make your body feel really good and it wants to go there. It's not a civilized thing in your body. The civilization is like all up here. But I think to the extent we can learn things that actually drive down that motivational, and some of them are going to be simple conditioning. I'm going to show you the chocolate cake, and then I'm going to show you this other thing that makes you feel even worse. And I'm going to do it over and over again, and maybe then chocolate cake's going to start to become half and half, and then it's going to become 50-50, and maybe eventually I can drive it up to here. That's what happens, right, when you were a little kid and you ate your favorite food, and then you got the flu, threw up your food, and then you didn't like it anymore. Right, everybody's had that experience with food poisoning, making something you loved into something you hate. So you can do it with one-time conditioning, but it's really hard. But over and over, but it's still going to be environmentally done. And I think environmental interventions, including communication ones, could be really strong here because if you can make the environment not conducive to the thing people want to do, at the same time you're giving them reasons not to do it, then you're going to help the aversive system win over the appetitive system. Like one of the things I say is like grocery stores should disallow all pictures on food. In fact, you should go in, everything should be in white package with the name of it on it. Take the motivational systems completely out of it. No brand names, because they're all about, they are all about building, and I see that brand and I go, yay, and then on top of that, you put a picture of really good looking food and I go, yay, and then you go, not only yay, I'm hungry now. So, it's about managing, helping people win. But even the recognition that if you start thinking about it that way, then it's not a failure of self-control, it is in a way, but it's also the environment working against you. And we know that. People say, don't go shopping when you're hungry. Well, because you're already going to be getting stuff like that. But I don't know. That's a long and disjointed answer.
We have one more quick question.
I actually have two. One where we agree and one where we disagree. I'll start where we disagree.
Always.
Actually, that role of the brain, my survival instincts immediately tell me I should challenge that.
Yours does fMRI stuff.
I don't do MRI. So to do vision, you need a photoreceptor or something. So you need a retina, and the retina is actually part of the brain. So while I agree when you make that reservation about the role of the frontal lobe, we completely agree. But I would say that you need a massive visual system to even decode color, form, what the objects are, and so on. So you need a multi-layered neural network somehow to do that. Or would you say that direct perception works through some kind of magic?
The retina, indeed, is part of the sensation system. The evolved receptor precedes it.
Okay.
You don't see it in direct perception with the retina. That's just the little thing that sends what you saw up to your brain so you can get it.
And what's the mechanism through which direct
Well,
perception
now that
works?
is a brilliant question. And the answer is, I don't know. And, but there's a lot of really fascinating experiments demonstrating that you can make the retina non-functional and people can still navigate environments. There's a lot of really interesting stuff, looking at the direct perception stuff.
Okay, but the second question, since I need
Oh,
to
well, I
speed
just
up.
want to tell you one,
Okay.
which is really interesting, which is that, no, I'm not going to do it.
You can.
No, sorry, go on, what's the
So
next question?
if there are many students here, and that what you said was quite a radical new paradigm, right? Dynamical systems, which I like. What literature did you find helpful? Because it's often pretty inaccessible
No
cast
kidding.
in physics terms, right? So what?
It is often,
Linda Nestor's book is good.
Esther Thielen and Linda Smith wrote a book on dynamic systems of human development. It was written in 1995, so they were pioneers of this approach, and they also have published work that follows that. But what I love about it is they lay out the paradigm in English, so we can all understand. It's an interesting topic, human development, so it's fun to read. They start with looking at motor development in babies, and then Linda Smith's stuff is about language development in babies, and from a dynamic system point of view. But what they demonstrate is three things that I think are really important. One is, how do you start? And that's why I said this Grand Theft Auto is absolutely modeled on a study they did with human infants and walking. And their Grand Theft Auto, right, they're what she calls a collective variable, one that slaves a bunch of systems, and you can define its state space very easily. Their collective variable was a treadmill, babies suspended on a treadmill. And they would run the treadmill, and then the babies could do one of four things. They could do nothing, in which case their legs just dragged and they hang in the thing. Or they could step with one foot, or they could jump, or they could alternate step, which is walking. And they're looking at the development of walking. And then they had babies come in starting at about 6 weeks old, and they came in once a month, and they had 2 sessions of walking on the treadmill once a month for 10 months. At the end of that, all the babies are walking. And their predictions were, lots of things, that they will all be walking at the end, but they will all take a different route. Some will gradually step more, some walks immediately, and then and that's a dynamic systems hypothesis, that it's not gradual. But they will all get there. They will all start here, and they will end here, and that's what they do. But then they started looking for the control parameter, which we can't do in this study because this is a secondary analysis of data collected for another reason. So we didn't collect data on good candidates, which particularly activate individual differences in the inverse of appetitive systems, which probably drive who goes towards hitting people and who doesn't, which we don't have that data on these people, so we can't look at it. But, and what they found out is actually the control parameter, the thing that smooths everything out, and you can see, and tells who's doing in his dissertation, he's actually got, those apps that insurance companies give you that tell them how much you're on your phone while you're driving. He's going to run subjects with those in their car, and then we're going to send them anti-texting and driving and anti-using your phone and driving PSAs in low and high dose that are representational or symbolic over the course of like 8 weeks, and see if we actually move their driving behavior. And he's also been taking modeling, and so he's going to work with Randy Beard in Indiana to actually try and make a model that shows us who moves and who doesn't and what goes on. So I recommend it just to make the whole ideas accessible and see all the different things you can do with it. Also, there's lovely chapters on don't throw away the data we already have. It's great empirical data. We can go back, and especially things that aren't making sense. Why are we getting this? Why do we get this from these people and this from that people? Once you have a dynamical theory of how it's working, you can go back to that data and say, well, then we should reanalyze this data this way and see if we don't find that we can predict who's going where now, because we have got an environmental variable that matters and an individual difference variable that matters and things like that.
Including a trifecta bag and a bunch of other crap.
Oh, thank you for my Michigan State things.
There's stuff in the little front bucket too.
Lots of stuff. There is. I like to get lots of stuff.